This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
But it was realizations like the one I was just talking about around the guilt, and that I wasn't a failure. I was doing the best that I could. Right? There is nobody that can do all of that. That perfect caregiver is a myth.
Caring for aging parents or other loved ones while working, raising children, and trying to live your own life? Wondering how to find the time for your personal health and happiness? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, the show where real family caregivers share how to be happy and healthy while caring for others. Now, here's your host, family caregiver and certified caregiving consultant, Elizabeth Miller.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, which is part of the Whole Care Network. If this is your first time listening, welcome. This is a show produced bi-weekly to help family caregivers integrate self-care and caregiving into their lives. Each episode has an accompanying show notes page, so if you'd like more details about the topics, products, and resources we speak about, you'll find the show notes by going on the website, happyhealthycaregiver.com, and underneath the podcast menu, click the image or episode number for today's show. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, the show note link is in your podcast episode description. Join the Happy Healthy Caregiver email list to stay up to date on all podcast happenings. Every Tuesday, you'll get the weekly roundup, which includes tips under the pillars of happy, healthy, and caregiving, plus upcoming events, special offers, and more. Go to bit.ly/HHCE news. For today's segment on what I'm reading, I read a book when I was on vacation recently called Love and Other Consolation Prizes by Jamie Ford. Now, Jamie Ford is the best-selling author of another book called Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. And I actually never read that one, but this one was inspired by a true story about a boy whose life is transformed at Seattle's epic 1909 World's Fair. I gave this 4 out of 5-star review on Goodreads, because I said it had great characters in this book who try to make the best of their unfortunate hands that they're dealt with. The book flips between 1960 and 1910 eras, historical fiction about Seattle World Fair, Red Light District, and women's rights. It's not a change your life kind of book, but a story that hooked me in to find out how they all got from here to there. So I will link to that book in the show notes, and I'll also link to my Goodreads profile if you'd like to check that out. My favorite thing this week, it's very fitting because I'm going to be talking to my guest today, Matt Perrin, and I really enjoy his 3 Thing Thursday email. It's his newsletter that he writes every Thursday, and he's going to talk in the show about how writing was important to him. But he spent, 8 years surrounded by Alzheimer's disease on one side and Lewy body dementia on the other with his wife's father. And he says that he's an expert in nothing but his own lived experience, caring for people that he loved. And that experience has stuck with him and is worth sharing. And so he sends out an email per week, and it makes him sit down and write, which is something that he still does. He writes about the 3 things he's thinking about doing, loving, or hating this caregiving week. So a link to the 3 Things Thursday email in the show notes page. Before we get into today's Caregiver Spotlight episode, I want to first shine the light on our episode sponsor, Rare Patient Voice. If you want to earn cash in exchange for your opinion, Rare Patient Voice, or RPV, helps connect researchers with the patients and the family caregivers for over 700 diseases and conditions. For patients and caregivers, RPV provides you the opportunity to voice your opinions to improve medical products and services while earning cash rewards. Rare Patient Voice helps patients and caregivers share their voices. If you're interested, join the RPV panel at rarepatientvoice.com/Happy Healthy Caregiver. Let's meet today's caregiver in the spotlight, Matt Perrin. Matt Perrin spent 8.5 years surrounded by dementia as a member of the sandwich generation. He was caring for his mother, Rosemary, who was living with Alzheimer's disease, and simultaneously helping his wife, Lindsay, care for her father, Steve, who was living with Lewy body dementia. Steve moved in with Matt and Lindsay in their home along with their 3 girls and their dog. Matt's lived experience gave him new professional purpose and unlocked a passion for creating that he never knew he had. He found solace in writing and continues his practice with his popular weekly email series. In this episode, we discuss unearned caregiver guilt, win-win perspectives, social connections that led to being in a documentary, and new career paths inspired by caregiving. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Matt, to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast.
Hey, Elizabeth, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted to get to talk to you. And a fun little fact, you won't know this because I hadn't recorded the intro yet, but I'm planning to put your 3 Things Thursday as my favorite thing of this episode, because I don't read a lot of caregiving emails, Matt, because I get kind of inundated with them, but I religiously and always read yours. Maybe not on Thursday, but it's not going to get out of my inbox until I check it out.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yes.
You're going to make me blush over here. No, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, sometimes you just so I know I put these newsletters together too on my end, and you're like, I don't know if anybody's reading these things. I don't know if anybody's, checking these things out, but we do it because part of it is, I think, cathartic for us to hopefully make it a little bit easier for someone else who's going through this caregiving journey. So that, and I just feel seen, I think is mostly. And I think you're making a lot of caregivers feel seen. So we'll definitely share, and I've already shared, but I'll share it again on how they can subscribe and even look up past episodes, or not episodes, past newsletter archives that you have. But you're consistent. You're always doing it, which isn't easy. It's not easy.
No, but it's become habit. So I totally agree 100%. I started writing just out of it was purely cathartic for me, and people started reading it, so I keep doing it for me and the readers. But thanks for the mention.
And it makes it not feel like it was all for naught, like this huge, rough, patchy, yucky, and in some ways beautiful season of our life, that it can benefit somebody else. Okay, well, let's we always kick off from the Happy Healthy Caregiver jar. I've got some hopefully words of inspiration in here and these PDFs are available on my website. And in fact, somebody just said, I didn't know there was an insert. So there's an insert that you can get more if this is your jam, if you like words of affirmation and things, which is something that speaks to me. So for your episode, Matt, it says, a champion is defined not by their wins, but how they can recover when they fall. And that's from actually Serena Williams said that.
I love it. Good theme. All right. And I happen to have married into a big tennis family. So I love that's a Serena quote. So
yes. Have you transitioned to pickleball, or is this like anti-pickleball?
So that's a loaded question. No, I wouldn't say we're anti-pickleball. And no, haven't made the transition yet. Occasionally. And it's a lot of fun. So
it's something that my husband and I have been playing. In fact, we might have bitten off more than we can chew, but we signed up for a winter Alta League here in Georgia on Saturday afternoon. So hopefully it won't be too chilly, but I like that it just is something we can do together, and it keeps us moving. And it's in addition to the things that I'm already doing activity wise, it didn't necessarily replace something. So it's fun.
Good for you guys. Yeah.
It's fun.
The question is, do you and your husband play together?
We do.
As a team? or against each other?
We'll see in Alta how they do it. I don't know if it's mixed doubles or if it's women and men, like the women and men on the team.
Yeah.
When we practice, we play together, and sometimes he can kind of get the vibe from me on whether or not I want coaching or not. He's definitely better than me. Like, he's an athlete, but I hold my own. I'm not horrible. From the other women's perspective, I would say I'm above average of the folks that we have played with. But he has no qualms of just like beaming me in the chest or anything. But it's funny. The other guys will kind of look at him and be like, whoa, like he hits his wife with the ball. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how we roll. So yeah. And it makes me better, right? I don't want to get hit.
Yeah.
It's just
That's one way to look at
it. It's a plastic wiffle ball. Right? It's not terribly hard, but he's making me better. That's how I phrase it. Or he's just getting at his marital frustrations after 27 years, which is understandable too. Well, speaking of marriage and family frustrations and all of that, like, give us a little bit about your caregiving story with you and your wife kind of went through and what that looked like for you all.
Yeah, happy to do that. So the headline is my wife and I each became a caregiver to one of our parents around roughly the same time. So I'm an only child. My dad died when I was younger. So my mom was living alone about 3 hours away from where we live up here in New Hampshire, and started noticing changes, and turned out she was living with Alzheimer's disease, and that was a 8.5, almost 9-year journey for my mom with Alzheimer's, and she passed away back in April of 2022. So and around the same time that we were, I guess, having these discoveries with my mom, my father-in-law Steve was, we were learning that he was living with Lewy body dementia. So and my wife and her siblings, lots of other things were going on at that point. We lost my mother-in-law early on in that process due to pancreatic cancer, and that made, of course, my wife Lindsay and her siblings their dad's person. And as family dynamics often shake out in a caregiving situation, it was determined that my wife Lindsay would be sort of the primary caregiver for my father-in-law Steve. And that's the headline. We walked that journey really from almost starting at the same time, within a couple of months of each other, to my father-in-law passed away in October of 21, I guess it would be at this point. So 7-8 months before my mom. But
and Steve moved in with you, right? Father-in-law Steve?
He did, yeah. Initially, there were sort of a few phases, as there often is. Lindsay and I have 3 girls who back then were in middle and elementary school. I guess all elementary school, now that I think about it. But young family, busy house, all of that. So our first thought with my father-in-law was trying to get him into a supportive environment, such as assisted living, that was close by our home, but gave us a little bit of separation, and more importantly gave Steve the sort of not just the help that he needed throughout the day, but sort of the engagement and sort of the activity of being in a communal living situation. And that worked for a little bit, and then it didn't.
Until it doesn't.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Which all about, and anybody that's been in a caregiving situation does. Nothing's forever. So we wound up moving Steve into our home, and it wasn't, it was a wonderful experience looking back on it now. Obviously it was a life change, the biggest life change we had experienced to that point, after having our children. And but we made it work, and it was all the adjectives. It was wonderful. It was really, really hard at times, and everything in between. So we had that going on at home, and then all the while my mom in assisted living down in Massachusetts, about 3 hours from our home here in New Hampshire. So
a lot. And I can resonate with parts of your story, because my husband Jason and I were simultaneously sandwich generation caregivers.
Yeah.
How do you describe that time of your life? Like when you guys are both kind of all over the place. You've got the kids, you've got the job, you've got the how do you describe it to people?
It's a good question. Well, as a little bit of an aside, but to give some sort of answer, I saw something recently in the last couple of weeks on the internet where someone was talking about how it should really be called the panini generation, because you're squeezed in the middle. Squeezed would be a word that would come to mind, for that period in our life. It was just exhausting, wonderful, all of it, right? And sort of my perspective on that time has changed and keeps changing, since our caregiving ended. So
what do you think your girls took from it? It's interesting to get their perspectives on.
Yeah, that's a question I really wish I had an answer to, because Lindsay and I still talk about sort of the impact of that period of time. And we've, as every family does, we just happen to experience a lot of loss in addition to in addition to the our caregiving years. So I don't know. I mean, I hope they took from it the example of being there for your people through it all. I guess that's kind of obvious. That's my hope, right? But we often wonder what sort of impact it's all had on them, and never really get so yet to be determined, I guess, is the answer. But it's
I mean, I know for me, I felt like guilty that I couldn't be doing there's just not enough for you to go around and adequately max out everybody's needs. Like there's just not. You're one human person, and even when there's both of you being pulled in a million directions. So it's I've talked before about how I felt like it was like feeding a nest of hungry birds. Like it just, as this parent or as this main role in this caregiving and world life nest, everybody needs something from you. And it's hard to discern like whose needs outweigh someone else's in that day. There's really not a balance. It's like it's like who's screaming the loudest, and is it really valid that they're screaming the loudest? Because I know sometimes my mom could be screaming the loudest, but it was because her Wi-Fi couldn't work and she couldn't get to her, her digital book. And I'm like, okay, not the biggest problem today. So you hold on that. We'll work on that. But there's a lot of management involved in it, and emotionally too.
Yeah, the guilt. The guilt that's a good one too. I'm really thankful. We were, thanks to Lindsay, really, we were pretty proactive in trying to find solutions. And whether that was talking to our own doctors, talking to our parents' doctors, for advice on resources or where to go, or, how to manage X or Y or Z. Thanks to Lindsay's proactive nature there, at least I learned pretty quickly that a lot of that guilt was unearned. And I needed to let it go because it was unearned. And I'm really, really thankful for that, because that lesson, or that realization is probably a better word, that came at a time when I was just, all that guilt that you're talking about, Elizabeth, I was so weighed down by it. It was consuming me. And attached to the guilt was this just pervasive feeling of failure. Because we were trying to do all the stuff, and I felt like I wasn't any good at any of it at that point. So anyway, realizing
it's a no-win situation, really.
Yeah, or win-win, right? It depends on your perspective. And it became less of a no-win and more of a win-win as time went on, and I sort of learned the skills that would help me sort of keep the perspective that I needed.
Do you get that win-win perspective? Like what would you tell someone now?
What would I tell someone now? I don't feel qualified to tell anyone anything other than what my experience was. And because that's what I'm an expert in, my lived experience. But it was realizations like the one I was just talking about around the guilt, and that I wasn't a failure. I was doing the best that I could, right? There is nobody that can do all of that. And never mind sandwich generation, there's nobody that can do all of what's required to care for one other person. It's just that perfect caregiver is a myth, I feel like. So it was a collection of realizations around and sort of in that lane that helped me realize that it got me closer to the perspective that I needed. And the other key pieces of that were finding ways to figure out what was most important. And for us, that I always used to talk about, like, our caregiving scoreboard was my mom or my father-in-law's demeanor, like their smiles, their laughter. In my father-in-law's case, like an extended period of eye contact that told me that he was with me. He was present. He was engaged in the conversation. Like those little things, they all add up, or they all added up for us. And over time, I learned that what was most important was that scoreboard. Like, are Mom and Steve happy? Like, have they smiled today? Have we had any of those little flashes of eye contact? At the points when they became nonverbal, or largely nonverbal, like, had we had any quips from them? Like, my father-in-law was such a wonderful, funny, witty, dry sense of humor guy. And even when, towards the end, when he was largely not verbal from a communication standpoint, he would still occasionally give us one of his sort of patented quips. Like, those were the things that we were, once we got there, right, as caregivers, like, those were the things that were driving us. It was less about, like, oh, got to keep Mom safe or Steve safe, can't let them do this or that. It was less about that stuff. And of course their safety was important, but it just, over time, thankful, thanks to advice and perspective from a lot of people, professionals, people who had been through it, likewise, they helped us see that, they helped us sort of hone in on what was most important for us. And it was all that stuff. So
I love
and
that.
that's what I'm kind of talking about when I think of, like, win-win. Because I found, for me, when I wasn't focused on that stuff and I was thinking about all the tasks that I had to do, I was missing stuff, right? Like, one of those moments that I'm talking about with my father-in-law, like, they happen really quick, and it's a few seconds, but the impact that like, just that those memories are still with me. Like, that's what I remember most now on this side of it, is those funny, just true, real moments. And I, if I was focused on all the all the tasks and to-dos and all that sort of stuff. I wasn't, it sounds cliche, but I wasn't present, right? I'd miss them. So
That's
anyway,
important. I think,
yeah,
it can be a coping mechanism to not have to feel the feels, and also to your point, not live in the present just by doing, and kind of feeling like you're on a treadmill or a hamster wheel, which is how I kind of felt when I would describe like the sandwich generation of when we were both in it.
yeah,
And then you do kind of get to that point, I think, where you're like, okay, this is my life. Like I need to kind of figure out how to slow this treadmill down, and how to and stop and smell the roses per se.
yeah,
But it does take a intentional switch, I think, like a little acceptance and intention is kind of the best way I can phrase it, where I could have just kept going and going, and I probably, my health would have continued to decline, my physical and my mental health. But that was also like an intentional switch too. It's like, oh wait, if I keep doing this, I'm headed down. Tipa says off the cliff. Like you're just gonna head off the cliff. Like don't do that. And so I appreciate that stuck with you. Do you think it has a lasting impact on how you live your life today?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And the one other thing I would say is, just going back to what we were talking about a second ago, like it's different for everyone, and my Lindsay, my wife, she had an entirely different approach, and she wrote this, she also would write at times, and it was cathartic. And she wrote this blog post, article, whatever you want to call it, about a trip to the dentist, because she was always avoiding and distracting herself, right? And she was focused on her dad's happiness and fulfillment and purpose and all of those things, but she just, like, her mechanism was to not get down into the weeds, stay focused on that, but like avoid the fact that in her words, she had two dads, right? She had her real dad and her dad that was sort of under this heavy cloak of Lewy body dementia as time went on. But anyway, it just everyone's works
different,
for you,
which is why we do this podcast, right? It's like I just didn't want me to be the one that's talking all the time. I think people need to try on different things and hear different things, and I'd rather them get them from family caregivers than so-called experts, right. Like we are the experts in caregiving, yes, in our own caregiving story, but we had to, like, it was a lot of trial and error. And so if we can kind of help somebody by pulling them up a little bit and make it a little bit easier, plus it's a form of advocacy. I don't want to just be one of the 53 million caregivers in the US. I want, you're Matt and Lindsay and Elizabeth. And
I agree.
These are your neighbors and your people that live down the street. Well, and one of the best care tips you shared with me is that about correcting your mom, who again had Alzheimer's. And by the way, I'm sorry for your loss, Matt, and also for Steve. And I don't know if today's my mom's birthday, so that would have it's interesting. So she's she's here.
Virtual hugs to you.
Yes.
I just had one in September for my mom as well. So
those markers,
the milestones. No fun. I'm still figuring out how to deal with those. They're not.
It's for me. It's like I try to. Usually, I text my siblings. I do post something kind of on social media, and sometimes I wear their favorite color or eat their favorite food, or ask people to kind of share stories about them. So it's not always the same, but I feel like just like some kind of like marker of like, this is not just any day kind of thing.
Yeah.
But one of your tips was about correcting your mom. I think you got from somebody, and once you got that tip, like it resonated with you, and it looked different. Like after you got that, we'll talk a little bit about that, because I think if there's people taking care of folks with dementia and Alzheimer's, and I know not every dementia is the same, but if that's the correcting part of it.
Sure. It was kind of I guess this is a little bit of hyperbole, but not much. It was kind of life-changing in Mom and I's life with Alzheimer's. And I think what resonated with me about it, or what stopped me to, enough to have it land, was that it was so simple. It wasn't jargon. It wasn't, sort of academic, or it was very simple. Stop correcting your mother. And the context was we had this just a wonderful nonprofit down where my mom lived, in Brewster, Massachusetts, at the Alzheimer's Family Support Center. Just an amazing place. And Molly, one of the professionals who ran it, they just work with families, and you can it's kind of like a hybrid between counseling and I don't know, just a warm blanket. Like, it was just wonderful. And she just, one day I was explaining to her that, I was so frustrated, and every conversation, every interaction with my mom would turn into a fight because I would correct my mother, right? And here she was, well into her journey with Alzheimer's disease. She's feeling things, saying things, trying to do things, wanting to do things that, to my mind, just were entirely disconnected from reality. They weren't like, no, you didn't go to the beach today, Mom. It was January 17th in Massachusetts. Like, that, what did you really do? Right? Like, and that would dissolve into a fight, an argument, which sounds horrible when you think about it, but it just, a mother and son sort of just tit for tat, bicker, arguments, and nothing good came of it. But what Molly's point was in telling me to stop correct my mother was that those things that she was feeling or saying or wanting to do, to her, they were real as a result of like the changes in her brain and her condition. And I hadn't yet made that connection. I hadn't yet bought into that. So really, it all comes down, if I boil it down in retrospect, it comes back to understanding, my mom's condition, right? To inform how I care for her, and be there for her. So, and the change was almost instant, right? It was hard for me to do at first because, again, some things I would hear or see just weren't, they were untethered from what I knew to be reality. But I just would choke that down as long as it was safe for her and others to do so, right? Like, she wasn't putting herself in or anyone else in danger. Lean in, go with her, and sure, trying to distract when you see an opportunity or sort of change topics, what have you. But that singular piece of advice really had a massive impact on Mom and I's quality of life together as she was getting into these middle and later stages of her condition. So,
I mean, thank you for sharing that. And it's like, we used to call them, my mom had some cognitive, we never had it formally diagnosed. She was already on hospice and last year of her life, but cognitive decline. And she definitely went on adventures, we'd say. Like, she just, and same thing. It's like, they were, once you kind of accepted it, it was like, it was entertaining just to kind of, it's like you're entering her world, as long as they weren't hurtful. And sometimes there were some really mean, horrible adventures. But you just remember, it's not Mom, it's the disease, or not Dad, that's the disease. Like, it's just, it's hard. It's hard. There parts of your story, Matt, are featured in you and Lindsay in the Wine, Women, and Dementia movie. Now, obviously, I know you told me you don't identify as a woman, but you're part of the package with Lindsay. And I love that there was a couple representation in the Sandwich Generation. I've had the privilege of seeing it. It's amazing. What was that like to be a part of the Wine, Women, and Dementia documentary?
It was wonderful. So I Yeah, it was wonderful is the short answer. When I was sort of at the middle-ish stage of my journey, I'm all on the internet all day for work. I was I was a Twitter user, and I found Care Chat from Denise Brown and
Denise Brown,
caregiving.com.
caregiving.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
way back when, and I personally got a lot of a very helpful sense of community, I'll say, through Twitter and Facebook and things like that. And one of the people I met was Kitty Norton, the creator, director, producer. Kitty willed Wine, Women, and Dementia into existence, which I just think is so unbelievable. I remember when she first asked, she sent me a message on Twitter. I don't think we even had each other's emails, but we were always sort of in touch. I loved her blog, just huge fan of Stumptown Dementia.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, I'll just never forget when she asked me, first she told me, like, I'm thinking of doing this, and then asked if, we'd want to participate. And just, of course, why not? But then it actually became a reality. It happened, 9-10 months, maybe a year later.
She drove from the West Coast over to New Hampshire and said, here I am.
That's right. She pulled right up I don't know if, well, you've seen the movie, so you've seen the RV.
Well, I've seen in person because I met her in Roanoke. I don't know if that was last year. Yeah, last year.
But yeah, it was just amazing. So first and foremost, amazing to meet someone who I consider Kitty a friend, although we had never met, based on the connection that we had around, caring for our parents, over the internet. It just, I felt like I knew her, and I did kind of know her, but it was, it was just so phenomenal on a bunch of different levels, that being near the top of the list, to actually, to actually live what part of her mission was with the film, which was to go around the country and meet all these people who she interacted with and communicated with as we were all caring for our people. It's just phenomenal. And and it was just a ton of fun, actually shooting, because Kitty does live the ethos. We did had a nice meal. Had a nice meal and a bunch of wine, and just talked. So, like, the authenticity of it all, if anybody's seen the film or plans to see the film, like, that was really what happened. We just got together, had dinner, had some wine, and had some real talk about our somewhat shared experience caring for someone that we loved. And it was amazing. And to see the final product, which I haven't even seen the full film yet. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. Kitty, you have
to go to a festival currently. Like, it wasn't
exactly.
Actually, by the time this is out, I think I know November 1st, Daughterhood, because Roseanne is also from the Daughterhood podcast is on it. They were going to show the full thing. But I will link to Wine, Women, and Dementia so people can find out how to view it. I too have only seen, we did a virtual cafe with Wine, Women, Dementia where we watched the 30-minute, and then I saw it at the Care Colloquium last year. But what I loved about it, Matt, is like it shows the multiple hats that caregivers wear. Like, she gives you snippets of what your caregiving life looks like, but then you see, like, oh, these are people. Like, when Wine comes out and you're like chatting at night, and it's, to your point, it's very genuine and authentic. And I think even if you're not a dementia caregiver, you will still get validation and lots of good stuff out of it. And of course, you'll be, connected to these folks. So it's amazing. I love that you have that experience. And yes, caregiving, like, it's one of the best things, I think, is the people that I've met, through caregiving, of course. But this experience has also sparked new professions for you. So, like, what did you used to do long before caregiving?
I was in technology sales, actually. Yeah. So never thought I would be.
Remember then? I was in IT way back when. Yeah.
It's hard to honestly at this point. But yeah, I had to step away from work when my mom. So everything happens in phases and all of that. But as I've mentioned, my mom was living a few hours away from us, and she was still living alone for the first couple years of what I consider to be part of my caregiving journey. And there was a lot of I was going back and forth all the time, and just burning, it got to be too much, and had to step away from work to get down there full time to get my mom transitioned either
did you
to
quit,
our home,
or did you do like FMLA, or like, I'm just curious what options were available.
Very small company, so I took a leave, but nothing official benefit wise.
Nothing paid, really.
No. So
it's a big decision. Yeah.
It was a gigantic decision, again, given where our family, young, it was a very big decision. But also on the other side of it, at a certain point, it became like an easy decision because it was the only option.
Right.
And yeah, so, but wound up never really going back, because over the time that we were looking for care for my mom, looking for care for Steve, just had a hard time finding care. Thought that part would be easy. And, we're in our 40s, figured we could, buy cars on the internet. It'll be easy to find assisted living, that's right for our parents, etc. And it just wasn't. It was a really kind of crummy experience to do that, and wound up starting a website.
Rowan Steve.
That's right. Yeah. Essentially a review website for senior care that was meant to be long form reviews. Like, it's kind of getting at one of the points you made earlier, Elizabeth, like getting a sense from other people who had experience with a family member, how did they feel about it? Rather than just star reviews. Like, you can't pick an assisted living on like 3-star or 4-star. Like, it just, I wanted sort of real perspective from people who actually had experience with the place. And we wrapped that. That's really where I started writing, because it was cathartic, but we just wrapped the reviews in storytelling. We just started writing about our day-to-day as caregivers for our parents. Anyway, fast forward, and I'm still working in this space, supporting caregivers. I work for a company called Carallel that does amazing work. We're a caregiver support company. We have a caregiver support line that's staffed by a team of care advocates who work with family caregivers.
Is it through it's through their employers, right?
Employers, health plans, providers in some cases. So it's provided as a benefit, either through any of those channels.
Amazing.
And it is. I feel really, really lucky to be working in this space to begin with, but to be doing it with a company like Carallel, that the impact that we're able to make on people who are in the thick of it is just, it's really fulfilling. So yeah,
it's amazing. Well, the Rowan Steve you sold, right? Like, no longer hands in that.
That's right. No longer. And it's been quite a journey, Elizabeth. It's like life happens. And then, so caregiving has given me this new, you asked a question earlier about sort of perspective on caregiving, and I can't imagine my life without the experience, but related specifically to what we're talking about now, it just gave me this newfound perspective on life in general, and sort of this, gave me this like need to just focus on what's important to me. It gave me a passion, a newfound passion that that is doing what I can to support others who are going through a caregiving experience.
Made you a movie star.
Yeah, it made me a movie star.
You got more than your 15 minutes of fame.
I mean,
Yeah.
have you seen the headshot though? It's not really star quality.
Listen, yeah.
But
That's
it
called
also gave me,
authenticity. Yes.
yeah, right. But it also gave me, like, I didn't ever knew I liked to write. Just, like I literally started writing as a self-care. I would be so charged up and like just twisted up that I would just open my laptop and start like stream of consciousness, just writing. And sometimes what would come out would be coherent. Other times it was totally not. It was anything but coherent, but I felt better after it. It was this just outlet for me. And I do a lot of writing as part of my job at Carallel, but I that's a big part of why I started my newsletter, which is just a personal project that it keeps me connected to that outlet. It forces me to keep using that outlet. And hopefully gives me a chance to support others.
Yeah, it
in
definitely
a moment
does.
when they might need it. So
the writing has, I mean, and it's not for everybody, right? But it definitely
No.
was something that was a great self-care tool for me. In fact, I had no time. I had no business blogging and doing that while caregiving. Like, to your point, like we were already stretched, right? But it was like a way to kind of process the experience. And so I used to go to Starbucks twice a week before work and blog. Is when, I called it my happy, healthy time. So it was,
I love that.
With a hot cup of coffee. And that's, that was the infancy of Happy Healthy Caregiver, but I wouldn't have kept doing it had it not been cathartic. And I now life in my business is much more different. I miss the focused writing. It's something I've been trying to kind of figure out how to get back to a little bit. Well, it's a good segue, because one of the reasons why I wrote the Just For You Daily Self-Care Journal is I wrote it with caregivers in mind, but it's not just for caregivers, but I wanted to have like a low entry point for people to try on writing. Mm-hmm. And for me, a prompted journal was really helpful for me in that process. But this one, it wasn't self-care specific. This one is self-care specific. But I also felt like we lose ourselves in caregiving, and the lights kind of dim. And so how do you find your way back through that dark and put some of that focus back on yourself to figure out who you are, without the caregiving. So we call this the lightning round just because whatever comes in your mind, but sometimes it's not so lightning, and that's okay too. Today you are grateful for what?
My family.
Yes.
That's an easy one.
That's easy.
But if we're trying to tie it back to caregiving, my caregiving experience, but family.
Designate a date night next week for family night. So with your girls, all your women, what activity would you enjoy doing together?
Ooh, that's a tough one. We have 2 teenagers now. Bowling maybe. Bowling. Or just going out to dinner. Our kids, one of those 2 maybe.
And allowing them to order off the adult menu. Like, remember the phase where it's like, oh my gosh, they're not on the kids menu anymore. Now, can we even afford to go out to eat anymore?
You're not kidding there. Gosh. Yeah.
Can't you split a meal? And why do you like steak and shrimp? Can't you like chicken tenders? Yeah.
Oh, wait, shoot. The Eras movie. That's what we do.
Oh, can I go? I wish I only
one has seen it. So although I'm getting kind of, it'll be fun.
You'll love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I will. I'm a Taylor Swift fan.
I love Taylor Swift. I went to the Eras tour with my daughter. It's like, I'm so glad I had that experience with her. And she knew all the albums, and I studied for Eras tour. Like, I took the assignment and did all of it. Just,
there you go.
But it's definitely the memories that will stick with you, to see, like, to watch anybody like in their element doing their joy. And I don't know how she does that all the time and keeps singing, and let's see. What did your teenage self imagine you'd be doing right now? Teenage Matt.
Ooh, probably playing pro hockey. Jokes on me.
Do you ever get to play any hockey anymore?
Not anymore. Too out of shape. And the
Yeah.
ice time's too late. Yeah. I like to watch the hockey though.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is deep, but I think you can handle it. How would you describe a successful life?
Oy, very deep. So this is one that's informed by my caregiving experience, and I'm not stretching to do that. But when it's all said and done, feeling like I had a purpose.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
I mean, I think that's where I'd leave it.
I think you have multiple purposes. So you've
I hope so.
you've got plan B, C, D, E, F, G on purpose. You've got it. You're nailing it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yes.
So
I
like the lightning round.
Yeah, it's fun. So how do people first of all, is there anything else that you're like, oh, I really wish we would have touched on this? Anything that you kind of feel like is unsaid? And then how do people stay connected with you and what you're doing?
Yeah. So anything unsaid? No, I don't think so. But one thing I would probably just reiterate, or maybe use some words, because we've self-care, which to me, I hate hearing self-care. It kind of makes me roll my eye. Like I had a hard time being told to take care of myself. Yeah. However, very, very important. And I had a hard time with it, as I'm sure lots of people in a caregiving situation do. But like thinking of yourself first isn't selfish. And I didn't learn that until I learned that too late in my experience. But I'm just going to put that out there. Like thinking about
it sink in, like how do we, that's the magic question, like that. How do we get folks to kind of take it to heart?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, Elizabeth, other than keep telling, like keep reiterating it. And for me, words are really important. And like I was telling you earlier with the stop correcting your mom, like the reason that landed with me at that moment was just because it was words that made sense to me, that they just landed. I think it's a similar type of thing here. It's I felt guilty, and it felt selfish to me to be thinking about myself, wanting to go do that thing with my friends when I'd said no for the last 6 months, or wanting to take an hour and go for a walk, or whatever it could be 5 minutes, right? But I always felt selfish, because like the dynamic in my head was, I'm caring for Mom or Steve, and they're here, right? Their needs are here, and mine are here or here,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where it is, right? But in reality, we're both here. Like my needs are every bit as important as my mom's, or were every bit as important as my mom's when I was caring for her. And not just because that I needed to be healthy and ready and recharged to give her the best care I could. That's true, but that's not the only reason.
Right.
It's because I deserve it. I'm a person, right? So
yeah,
it's not selfish to sort of put yourself on that same level. So I don't know if I answered your question about how we get people to realize it.
Yeah.
But
we hope you do. Yeah.
I feel it in my gut.
What did it look like for you? Like when you first started inching toward it? Because it's not, I'm sure it was a process.
Yeah. It's tough to say what it looked. It felt like more like, it felt like I could relax my shoulders a little bit in those moments. It felt like I could actually enjoy that beer with my buddies over to watch the football game, or half of a football game, or whatever. I could be actually doing something for myself, and actually liking the fact that I was doing something for myself.
Right.
So that's kind of for me, that's what it looked and felt like, I think.
At first I kind of there's a lot of self-talk that goes through that process. And for me, it
Yes.
was what somebody had said this to me, and it resonated because, again, like, words stick with you that people are like, oh, now I get it. And it was like your parents, in this case, had already lived this part of their life. Like, they've already been in their 40s. They already, like, you get to do your 40s too, or you're now I'm in my early 50s, but you get my drift. It's like, we only get that time with kids certain age, or friends that are, you know, the things that we're interested in. So and ultimately it's a yes and, where, it didn't make you any less of a caregiver. You still were a huge support for your father-in-law and your mom and your kids, and showing up, in different ways. So, I hopefully this will, like, that's the other hope, what I'm hoping the podcast, like, just to normalize those conversations. And again, self-care looks different for everybody. There's lots of varieties of what it looks like. So maybe here's something, you try it on and see if it works for you. And that's what our hope is. Well, how do people stay in touch with you, Matt?
The newsletter is probably the easiest way. It is, you can find it at 3thingthursday.com/newsletter. I'm on Twitter as well, I guess X, but not as much. Used to be. I'm really bummed by that whole thing, by the way. Like, it's just feels different now. But I am there. It's at Matt_Perrin, Perrin.
And we'll link to your other stuff. You're a little bit on Instagram, a little bit on Facebook and LinkedIn too.
Yeah. But I've been sort of interesting I can't really put my finger on why, but I'm still a lurker on social media, but I haven't been as active since the loss of Mom and Steve, for whatever reason. But it
was a season.
But
and it maybe it'll come back. Maybe
that's why I haven't deleted the accounts.
It's not going to be next year for me. Like the election year, like, I almost just want to fast forward.
I know.
Can we get past that?
I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah. 3thingthursday.com/newsletter. It's one email every week on Thursday mornings. That's probably the best way to get in touch.
It's amazing. So I hope you guys check that out. Thank you, Matt, for spending this time with me, being vulnerable, sharing what you share, and just, giving a voice to your story and the space to kind of share it. I really appreciate this time with you today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite. I had a lot of fun. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast on the Whole Care Network. As always, show notes that accompany today's episode can be found on my website, happyhealthycaregiver.com. Just look under the podcast menu for today's episode image, and that will take you to the page with the links and information we spoke about today. You'll also find other resources on the website, along with links to purchase the Just For You Daily Self-Care Journal. When you purchase from my website, you'll get a signed copy, and for a limited time, free shipping. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider subscribing to the show on your podcast platform. It really helps other family caregivers find the podcast, and you'll automatically receive our bi-weekly shows in your podcast listening queue. Maybe while you're subscribing, consider leaving a 5-star rating and review, or just simply talk it up on your social channels. Let's stay connected. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Happy Healthy Caregiver. And until we meet again, please take care of you.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.